It's KBKW's Coffee Talk. It is 7:13, and we have two professors, historians in the building right now, Gary Murrell and Stephen Arms. Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Good morning.
And you guys met for the first time?
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
I've never encountered, we don't think we've ever run into each other before.
You know, I forgot to ask before we started, what did you do your PhD study in?
I don't have a PhD. I'm not a doctor. I have a master's degree. I did a historiographical work on the life of Theodore Roosevelt.
So U.S. But that was your focus?
Well, my U.S., but I do have extensive ancient world coursework too.
I had to wait till later to start studying ancient history. I focused on U.S. as well, 20th century.
Yeah, it is generally the easier one to do, because generally you have to have, if you're going to get ancient history, you have to have a decent comprehension, generally, of an ancient language.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, my Latin is weak.
Yeah, I have neither Latin nor Greek.
I took it for 3 years and still don't remember half of it, or one quarter of it.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
1/8 of it.
Do high schools still teach Latin?
I don't know if high schools do. I know my daughter was able to take Latin courses.
Oh.
And she actually knows more about Latin than I do. I'll have her translate stuff for me every once in a while.
Although we do now have Google Translate.
Yeah, then I do admit I have to make use of that, especially with, there are a lot of languages in the world, and what the heck do they actually mean?
Yeah, there are. When we were in France last, we put an app on our iPads so that we could say something, and the iPad would translate it, and the person to whom we were speaking could read it on the iPad.
I have a friend who lives in Japan, and I keep progress with him, and you can see how the electronics are changing for him, because he teaches English in Japan. Of course, if you're going to learn it conversationally, you have to actually have coursework. You have to speak with people if you want to learn it conversationally. But he's been, I remember, 5 years ago it was I've got this, and now it's primitive. He can just do it with his phone, like you're saying. So it makes it much easier.
How did they accept it over there? Because when I was in Germany, we didn't have such things, So how did they accept it if you're showing them something that...
Yeah, when I was in Germany and visited France, they wouldn't make any accommodation, and this was in the 1960s. They would make no accommodation for English. In fact, they laughed. It was a national pride, right? You speak English, you don't speak French. Well, to hell with you. With my primitive French, they were so accommodating and so
because
helpful.
You were trying,
right? And the iPad they loved.
Oh, okay. I struggled with it, and in fact, I got slapped. I was trying to ask this girl what time it was, and I don't know what the heck I said, but she slapped me.
It may have just been how you said it.
Well, I don't know. I was trying to be, I don't know. But I'd only been there for like 3 or 4 months, so I hadn't really picked up much of the language at all.
My experience in it is that it's Parisians tend to be very close-minded as far as your language different. If you don't speak French, then what the hell? But as you get more into the French countryside, the people
away from the
cities, people tend to be much more tolerant. They're willing to give you more of a chance.
They're not snooty.
It was in Paris that we used our iPads and stuff, and that they were really nice. They were really
technology, though. Again, it's a new gizmo. So people are always dazzled by new technologies.
So. So what is your take on the election results and each of your opinions? What do they show?
Go ahead.
Oh, so you've been here longer than I have.
Oh.
We live in a constitutional republic. I like it when things actually shift and change in power peaceably. So it didn't surprise me at all, because again, in midterm elections, there's almost always a shift in power between whoever holds the office of the presidency and the legislative branch. This one I'm actually a little bit surprised that it didn't shift more, because traditionally it does. It's 75% of the time it shifts. And again, this was true for Bush and true for the Obama administrations. Sure. So it's I personally, it'd be interesting to see what happens with it, because now that you've got, now that the Democrats have skin in the game. What are they going to do? Are they going to legislate? Are they going to come up with compromises and deals? Or are they actually going to do things? it'll be good to see.
What do you think, Gary?
Well, I'm glad that there is now a check on the mad orange man in the White House. And I hope that the Democrats don't start running away and thinking they're going to impeach the man. Because they could do that in the House, of course, but there's absolutely no possibility of the Senate voting to impeach Trump. So I think that's good.
No, I did see an interview with a Democrat that said they were going to pick their wars or their battles, but go after certain issues when it comes to Trump.
Well, their job is oversight, and they ought to be doing it, and they haven't been doing it for 2 years. They've been playing at it. This guy Devin Nunes was colluding with the White House to stop any kind of investigation into anything dealing with
Now,
Trump.
Stephen just shook his head no.
Well, I mean, I don't generally assume things about people that I don't know. So, I mean, I don't read people's minds. So, I mean, I will go on what people say. Collusion is an interesting term. It gets thrown around a lot. It isn't a crime. I mean, collusion only exists in the context of you're dealing with insider tradings and things like that. If you want to use the word conspiracy, then that's fine. Use the word conspiracy and call it what it is.
So you can't collude with the Russian government then?
No, it's not. You can if you want, but it's not a crime. Collusion isn't a crime. Conspiracy can be a crime. And treason can be a crime. But collusion is not. There's no federal statute that says that you can be arrested for collusion.
Well, there's such. I wasn't talking about a legal. When I used the word collusion, I was not talking about a legal definition or prosecuting Nunes for a crime. I was saying that, all right, if you want, he was conspiring with the White House to stop any kind of investigation in the Congress into the election, into Russian interference in the election, to conspiracy between the Russians and the Trump campaign.
If you can say that, but since you don't actually know his mind, you're assuming that
Whose
from
mind?
his action, Nunez's, you're assuming things about him that you don't know. You're saying he didn't do his duties, and yet do you have specific examples of that? Or
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
example?
Yeah, we recall I don't remember exactly what was going on, but he went up to the White House in the middle of the night with some kind of information, and then came out and announced they had found the information. And
definitive answers. Yes. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, I don't. The Congress has rights. Is an oversight. It has oversight powers. I agree with that. But it also has legislative powers. And the problem is that I would like to see them legislate and actually do their job. Oversight is one of their duties, but legislative is their primary duty. It'd be nice to actually see laws. And there are plenty of things I believe that the Democrats and the Republicans in this administration can work on. I think that they'll be able to come. Infrastructure is one of the ones I think definitely would be the case. Congress needs to come up with changes in immigration policies, because our immigration policy needs to be fixed. I mean, it has holes and flaws in it. It needs to be repaired.
It needs to be updated too. I mean,
exactly is what it comes down to, because situations and circumstances change. But I'd much rather, if they're going to legislate, if their whole point is to be the judicial branch arm going after this administration, all they're going to do is make sure they don't get reelected in 2020.
We need to take a break, guys, and we'll be right back. It is 7:22, and we'll be back with Gary and Stephen in just a moment. It's KBKW's Coffee Talk. It is 7:22. Now, a question that I have for you, and this happened this last weekend, is number one, the president kind of getting, I guess, corrected somewhat by France and by Merkel in Germany about the way he does things. And what he says, and then also the issue of him not going to an armistice ceremony that they had, that all the other leaders went to, but he didn't. What's your take on that? The optics, anyway, of that, because he's taking a lot of heat.
Yeah, well, I thought it looked terrible for Trump. I'm not happy with celebrating wars and whatnot. I think it's destructive.
But aren't you celebrating the people that died? I mean, isn't that kind of remembering them?
Honoring the people who died.
Well, I think I'd rather talk about what was the cause, and so why did the United States get involved in World War I, and what were the implications of that, both domestic and foreign. But to come back to Trump, it seemed to me that the excuse that it was raining didn't seem to wash and made him a laughingstock around the world.
I've long since given up understanding exactly why Donald Trump does exactly what he does. He is a very unique individual in that. I also have no real interest what Macron and Merkel have to say about it, because they're just they're entitled to their opinions. That's fine. I would have probably went to it because I think he would have been honored, but that's me. But I'm not the president of the United States, and I don't know why he.
But shouldn't he be aware of those things? He
should be. And again, it's a case of, is he being good represented by? Because presidents are only generally as good as the staff and people they have working with them. They're going to talk to them about optics. They're going to talk about things that they need to do. I don't. Like I said, I'm not in Trump's head. I don't know why he decided not to do it. I would have done it personally. But
then yesterday, he didn't bother to go to the Tomb of the Unknowns, as every other president has done. Although I did see a picture of the French embassy laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns yesterday.
When did he get back in the United States? I haven't
Sunday.
watched the news on it. So that is unusual. But presidents should go. He did go last year to the Tomb of the Unknown. And again, it's a matter of honoring. But again, people have their duties and their priorities. What else is he working on? What else?
I also think he's kind of mopey right now about what happened in the elections.
Maybe, but on the other hand, he kept the Senate and he's made gains. So that's going to be a crucial factor for his administration, because he's going to have to talk about.
Well, let's go to our listener line. Hi, you're on the air.
Hey, glad you guys are past the whole somebody moment you were having at the beginning. Gary, it's good to hear you, and sir, it's good to hear you too. I forgot your first name.
Nice seeing you the other day, John.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It was everybody, both sides, I think, and I don't know if there's really sides in the political parties, but they pulled this phrase out, the Founding Fathers, quote unquote, the Founding Fathers, and it drives me up the wall, right? Because they'll always pull that phrase out, the Founding Fathers, when they want to justify something right in the Constitution or something like that. But I think the Founding Fathers, whether it was in those three documents, the Declaration, Articles of Confederation, and Constitution, I think they were all different, right? Or there were only three at some point that were the same throughout them all. But anyway,
what were all different, John?
The Founding Fathers that signed the documents, those documents.
There was a lot of overlap.
There's a lot of overlap between it.
Yeah. So, but my thing is, I think both of you would agree that what we have today, the Founding Fathers didn't want. None of them, right? We have a president that's almost in king status, that has too many powers. We have a Congress that's, impotent, I guess. But I think where you guys agree, and I disagree, and I'm just conversing, is the Articles of Confederation and the coup that is the Constitution. I think we should have stayed under the Articles of Confederation and just made it better instead of making the Constitution. So, anyway, I wish you guys would get into the history part and not focus on the Cheeto in charge. And Gary, just understand, no matter what you say, you're never going to be right, because some guy who likes to take shots of a Roundup and read YouTube comments is going to say you're wrong. Later, buddy. Bye.
Okay.
Not quite sure what to say about that.
My hearing is not well. I didn't understand what he was saying at the end.
I think the key point was that we should have stayed with the Articles of Confederation, right, and not adopted the Constitution. Okay.
But I think he's a member of the.
Going to judge that in modern context?
I think he's a member, though, of the Constitution Party, which
he's a libertarian.
Right.
Well, no, he's a Constitution Party.
which is even...
Yeah, in fact, he's coming in a week or two or so. Yeah, I guess I have libertarian, but that's not what it was. I just put that down. He's a Constitution Party.
Which I assume is pro-Constitution, but we want to go back to the articles that...
That's what I'm saying.
The articles,
which
did not have any executive branch in it all. It did not have any way to tax states.
Right.
It had, it really had virtually no way to even raise military forces.
One-house legislature.
I mean, unicameral, I agree. So, I mean, I'm not quite sure, why that would be an advantage.
I think because it was a strong state... States were strong, and the federal was weak.
All right. Well, that bumper music...
I think that's that was John's point.
His contention?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we've got a break coming up, and then we'll be back and continue our conversation. It's 7:29. KBKW's Coffee Talk. 7:37 is the time, and we have a listener calling in. By the way, we have Gary Murrell and Steve on Arms, both historians that are with us today. And let's go to our listener line. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. I have a comment and a question for you. So last week we were talking about nationalism, and I'm wondering about good and bad nationalism, and I remember now that I looked up the name of the person from Norway, Fridtjof Nansen. He won the 1922 Nobel Peace Prize, a great humanitarian from Norway, but a real nationalistic person, believed in nationalism, but it seems like it was a good nationalism for Norway. And so, Emmanuel Macron was talking about that, the France's president, this weekend on the 100th. He was saying that there's patriotic nationalism, and then, so are there all kinds of nationalism? And can I read one quote from Fridtjof Nansen? He was given elected honorary rector at St. Andrews University, in a speech he gave to them, the students there, he said, yes, there can be no doubt that excessive nationalism as well as class warfare are dangers, but there may be dangers on the other side too. Beware the tendency towards too much internationalism, towards unification, towards creating a great uniform human family. Increasing urbanization, uniform education rapidly, improving means of transport and communication tend to abolish distance, wipe out those characteristic differences between peoples, nations, cultures, which have made life interesting and beautiful and acted as an important stimulus to new thought. There are several ideals in vogue nowadays toward a dangerous monotony, uniform grayness, in which it would be difficult to develop one's own personality. All this may be difficult to alter, but we ought not to shut our eyes to it. Give me your thoughts on that. If that's too much, I'm sorry.
Nationalism. Well, I was going to say, Macron's issues I thought was interesting because he talks about nationalism and patriotism, but yet if you actually open up the dictionary and read patriotism, nationalism is is the first synonym you're going to encounter for it. It all depends on the interpretation of it.
Well, I think perhaps his point was patriotism would say, my country is good for me. A nationalist would say, my country is the greatest country in the world ever and ever has been, and it's exceptional, and nobody can ever come close to it, and we're going to rule the world.
Well, the ruling the world part is when you run into a problem, but thinking your country don't almost all nations think that they have the best nation in the world? I mean, that's why they're in those nations. Doesn't Canada think it's a great nation? Doesn't Germany think that it's a great nation? I mean, I don't necessarily... Again, nationalism itself isn't the issue. It's what you do with the nationalists. If you're the Nationalist Socialist Party in Germany, under the rise of Hitler, logically, then your nationalism is now becoming a problem to the world because you're spreading as an imperial
now,
power.
was Mussolini's Italy the same in a sense? And that was nationalistic as well.
It was.
And Franco?
Those are again, yeah, you're talking about the idea of nationalism to the point, and the Soviet Union, and China.
And the United States.
Today, the United States believes that it is the best nation in the world, and that's fine. I don't necessarily have a problem with people believing it. If you're going to expand using military force to enforce it upon other peoples, then now you're talking about nationalism gone too far.
Okay. So that's kind of how you want to answer that question, then.
Yeah,
I don't really. Like I said, it has. Nationalism has only if it isn't the nationalism is an issue. It's the application of it and the philosophies behind it that will make it wrong. The interesting the quote that our caller just made, though, there were aspects today about the value of the individual states and the cultures that she was talking about in there that the European Union might disagree with, actually. I mean, you could make the argument the other direction that the unification of the European Union is trying to eliminate some of this nationalist ideas and philosophies and the pride of individual nations being covered over by a larger governmental structure.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know anything about the person whose quote it was, but it seemed to me it was he was talking about communism without saying the word. Calling it bland and taking away individuality. I think that's what he was. Russian communism.
Well, she's talking about the 1920s, and again,
right.
it would have been an issue in the 1920s, because again, the American Communist Party is in 1920s also.
Now, another big issue in the country are gun rights. Mm-hmm. How do you come down on the gun rights issue? I'm curious how you
Second Amendment of the Constitution.
But I mean, people read into it different things. As to okay, well, when it says that you have the right to arm yourself with what? Because technology's changed so much since that was written. It also talked about a militia, but I don't think they have militias anymore.
Well,
per se.
Technically, any state army could be a militia in modern context.
So National Guard would be a militia.
It would be considered that,
okay.
But in the context of when the Constitution was written, a militia is a citizen army. So I mean, the context is that a citizen army being necessary for the maintenance of a free state is what they're talking about. I mean, again, but I doubt very seriously that, again, to antagonize our caller, the founding fathers had considered the idea that you could have a cannon filled with case or shot in the middle of your driveway to defend it against your neighbor's dog coming over. I mean, there would obviously have been restrictions they would have considered also. You're not allowed to have battlements full of cannon and snipers. They would have probably considered that to be unnecessary and over the top. So, I mean, again, weapons are we entitled to have weapons to defend ourselves? Yes. Are we allowed to have weapons of mass destruction to defend ourselves? I don't think you need to have Ebola viruses in your stock to protect your home.
Well, even the most rabid, fetishistic Second Amendment supporters seem to believe there's some limitation
right.
to the Second Amendment. And so the question is, where does the limitation begin and end?
And so when they describe an assault weapon, there's a big argument, well, that's not an assault weapon because it doesn't fire on automatic.
Well, that's a very strange context of assault weapon. The idea of an assault rifle, assault weapon doesn't really come into existence in terminology until the end of World War II. The Nazis actually used it in describing some of their later designs of weapons because it sounded spooky. I mean, again, a fully automatic weapon versus semi-automatic weapon versus single-action weapons. I mean, there's different categories because we're talking about guns. I'm assuming we're reasonable saying you probably shouldn't have flamethrowers and tanks and things like that as part of your, and that would be the issue.
I have to get rid of my flamethrower?
Well, it depends on how you use it. You might if you burn weeds with it, but if you burn conservatives with it, it's generally considered it's a bad thing. I don't care what people say, that's a bad thing. But if you're that's the factor people talk about. And most of the times when people make assessments about guns, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. That's one of the issues. We have congressmen talking about, fully automatic weapons. You can't buy fully automatic weapons in this country except under very special permits. And there's some security organizations. There's some that allow for it. Some collectors can have it. I knew someone used to own an M60 because he was a historical collector of weapons. But I mean, go ahead.
I think there's some semantics going on too. I know people call in and want to criticize when someone says an assault rifle. Oh, well, you didn't. It's not called that, and they want to play word games. These powerful military weapons, and these callers know what we're talking about. Really.
Well, yeah, the round. It's not a hunting round that comes at you.
They're not shooting deer with those things. They want to go play with them. Fine, then register them. So we know where they are, and we know where they aren't or shouldn't be.
But again, the definition is, what are we talking about? You're talking about a semi-automatic weapon. Okay.
Right, but you're also talking about the round it's using, the speed of the round, and what it does when it enters
it depends
the body.
on what your definition, though, is. Why do we have weapons? Do we have weapons to kill deers? Or do you have weapons to protect yourself?
M16 was developed to shoot people.
It is.
Yeah.
But M16s are fully automatic weapons, and you can't buy them.
But it's the round,
and
too.
the Kalashnikov knockoffs.
Yeah. No, but the Kalashnikov's a 9mm. I mean, the M16's round is basically a modified .22 round.
Right, with a lot of powder, and it rips into objects.
But again, a 22 rifle that has an 8, you have an 8-clip 22 hunting rifle, which people have, still can be fired. If it's fired semi-automatic, it's going to do virtually the same damage. Depends on the load you put into it.
Well, it depends on if it's firing an M16 round, that's different than a regular 22 round.
But even 22 rounds, it depends on what you want. Armor piercing versus dum-dum rounds versus things like that.
How much powder you want, yeah.
It's all back and forth on what you want to determine it as. A lot of people, what is the issue is, I want to get rid of semi-automatic weapons. Well, every weapon is a semi-automatic weapon, except for single-action weapons. If I have a Colt 45 single-action revolver, I hold the trigger and I pull the hammer back and forth 5 times.
The old fanning business.
And congratulations, now I have a semi-automatic weapon. So,
yeah, I think that's words again.
But it ultimately has to. What do you want to do with it?
Yeah,
you going to, where are you going to make the cutoff on that?
Indeed, and that's why we elect people, right?
That's why we elect people
for them to do that, to make decisions.
Yeah,
then we can talk about that. They present us with a list and say these are the weapons that we think ought not to be available to everyone in the country. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that list.
You can do that, but you're going to have to make sure that list also is, again, it has to be built on knowledge, not built on ignorance. We have a lot of people who, again, half the people in Congress, I've seen congressmen walk up with a gun in their hand and make some statement and obviously didn't know what the hell they were talking about.
Well, there are congressmen who don't know that the Constitution gives the power to declare war to the Congress.
It does.
Astonishing.
And I agree with that. The Congress, it is what it says for declaration of war, but I also would point out that it also gives the president the right to make decisions as the commander-in-chief. And if I could, that's an interesting point, because we actually haven't declared war on anybody since World War II.
That's right.
That's the last time. That is an issue I have some contention with also, because I do believe that. But again, I do believe President of the United States have to react to circumstances. Obviously, if you think there's an imminent attack or whatever, or there's a situation you need to do it. Again, but the Constitution isn't necessarily considering the idea that we were going to have military forces in other nations and bases there at a constant level. So there has to be some consideration of how those forces are deployed and used.
Yep.
And that's going to have to come from a commander-in-chief decision. I do really think that the argument we were talking earlier about the idea of nuclear weapons. If a president has the power to use that in the event of an imminent attack, there's reason the DEFCON 1 situation. But do you really think if you had a nuclear attack, you could wait to have Congress to make a decision whether you could use those weapons?
Well, my preference would be to ban nuclear weapons and for the United States to renounce ever using nuclear weapons and do away with all of them that we have.
If you can get the Russians and other people in the world to agree with that, I have no problem getting rid of nuclear weapons either. But if you can't get rid of those weapons, then you're just setting yourself up for annihilation.
Well, we have a call coming in, but we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with our caller. So stay on the phone, and we'll be right back with you here in just a moment. It's KBKW's Coffee Talk. It's 7:52. Let's go to our listener line. Hi, you're on the air.
Man, I just listened to Naomi on that ad. She's such a great spokesman for Farmers Market.
Yes,
Anyway,
she is.
I know that Gary thinks that Israel is the cause of all the problems in the Middle East, but they sit there and thrive as an economy, and they're being sniped at as we speak when they try to keep peace. And they got bombs going across the border, and then they retaliate. And I would like to hear your two opinions on this. To me, it's the most black and white, clearest political issue of my lifetime. The Israelis are minding their own business, doing what they do best, and producing for the world economy, and the Palestinians, who don't produce anything for the world economy or anything, period, are sniping at them, and I feel sorry for them, quite frankly. So I'm going to take the answer off the air.
Okay, guys.
Yeah, I'll put it simply. When I was in monitoring Israeli human rights abuses in 1989 for a couple of months, I had dinner with an Israeli Jewish professor, Israel Shahak. He rolled up his sleeve and showed me the tattoo numbers on his arm from Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. And he said, I know what fascism is, and I live in a fascist country.
You'd have to define, of course, what you mean by fascism for that to be, a statement.
I'm just telling you what
validity.
Professor Shahak
and then that's very nice anecdotal evidence, but it's exactly that. It's just anecdotal evidence. I mean, if the United States had Canada throwing missiles across our border and blowing up northern Seattle, the United States would do strikes or would actually declare war directly on it, go in and pacify Canada. If any nation has a right to defend its borders. And remember, the whole Palestinian concept is simply that of does it even have a right to exist? People go, well, the Palestinian homeland. Well, exactly according to who? When the Jews were driven out in the 300s, I mean, that was when the Palestinian state was created by the Roman Empire. It was Palestine, and of course, in the ancient Roman, or translation if they ever begin to it. So I mean, what exactly are we talking about? Why doesn't Israel have a right to be there as a nation? And at this point, it's totally academic. It is there as a nation, and as far as I can tell, it is. It's been attacked many times. It's been attacked by multiple nations many times. It's fought them off, and it has made some territorial shifts in James over that. But does it not have a right to exist?
You said a country has a right to defend borders. Israel refuses to state what its borders are, so it has no borders.
That's an interesting statement. I don't think it's factually accurate, but you can say that if you want.
Well, okay, you can look it up. You mentioned Canada. If the United States had turned Canada into one huge open-air prison...
Oh, please. Israel has not turned that into. That area that was divided up, it should actually be part of Jordan and the other states around it. It was carved in because of Yasser Arafat and the various actions that happened in the past. There could be no Palestinian state there at all. It could just be parts of other countries.
Well, Gaza is an open-air prison for 2 million people.
In your opinion, I don't think that
that's the only opinion I have.
That's an opinion, but does it have any factual basis in it? I don't actually see any. Are they all in prison uniforms walking around? Do they have to come and get their meals from the commissary every day? I mean, most open-air prisons don't throw missiles into the guards without there being a problem with it. So, I mean, I don't understand this argument at all. The gentleman, Israel is there, and Israel has a right to exist as a state. Interestingly enough, I've been noticing with the exception of, I think the situation with the Palestinians is going to probably be dealt with more by the Muslim world, because actually with the Iran being in the situation it's in, is becoming the enemy of my enemy situation. I've seen a lot more cooperation between Israel and other of the Arab nations. Oddly enough, you might end up with peace in the Middle East, but it's only going to be because of having a common enemy.
Yeah. Well, Israel's an apartheid state. The Palestinian Israelis do not have the same rights as Jewish Israelis. You said Israel's been attacked. In fact, Israel has started every war except 1972.
You feel free. It isn't historically accurate. There are plenty of occasions that Israel's been attacked by other nations.
We have to stick to some kind of fact.
Well, when you run into one, let me know.
Yeah, well,
because let's see.
I'll trust Edward Said.
Let's see. Do we want to actually talk about this?
Well, now, have you ever been to Israel, Stephen? Have you ever been to Israel?
I've studied its history.
Do you think being there though makes it a little different? Give you a different opinion if you were actually there to see things on the ground?
And it gives you anecdotal opinions, but does that have any effect on whether or not the situation is? Does the nation state have a right to defend its borders? I don't understand the argument. In apartheid state, you're telling me that no one that in Israel, other than Jews, have the right to have rights?
I said Palestinians have many fewer rights than Israeli.
The Palestinians that are in Israel, or the Palestinians in Palestine?
Palestinian Israelis.
So the ones that are living in it.
Right.
Okay. As far as I know of, I didn't know there was any differences between their rights. I haven't heard any differences that those people are not allowed to have voices in the elections and be involved in the situation there.
Well, I hate to bring this one up, but have you ever heard of a Palestinian in the Israeli army? No.
I also wouldn't be surprised that I wouldn't have an ISIS member in the Israeli army either.
Well, Palestinians are not members of ISIS in Palestinian Israelis. Maybe there are some there. 20% of Palestinian Israelis are Christians.
Well, then they really need to be careful in dealing with their part of the world, considering that Christians are considered second-class citizens. But that
in Israel?
No, in Islam.
Yeah, well, all three of the religions are crazy.
So that would be a simple argument. They're all crazy, therefore they can do whatever they want.
Well, I didn't say that.
So you're agreeing to disagree this morning?
I think so.
No, and I would agree. We're agreeing to disagree on.
If you wish to join the quest for knowledge, the battle for truth, please hit the like button, recommend my channel to others, and of course, subscribe. Thank you kindly.